Have you ever imagined being on a ship, surrounded by water on all sides, and suddenly realizing it's sinking? Your heart races, panic takes over. Now think about the Titanic, the most famous ship in history, which claimed over 1,500 lives in 1912. Tragic, isn't it? But here's a surprise. The Titanic wasn't the deadliest shipwreck of all time. There's an even more terrifying story, a disaster so devastating it took thousands of lives at once. And hardly anyone talks about it. Do you want to find out which one it was? And why so many maritime tragedies end up forgotten? Then you're in the right place. Before we dive into these spine-chilling stories, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of these shocking tales that no one ever tells you. Get ready to uncover a dark and mysterious side of history that will leave you speechless. Stay until the end of the video to discover the deadliest shipwreck in all of history. The Titanic was a massive, luxurious ship that sank in 1912, taking over 1,500 lives. It became so famous that it even inspired a movie filled with drama and emotion, showcasing just how devastating the tragedy was. But what if I told you there were other shipwrecks even deadlier, ones few people have ever heard of? Yes, it's true. Despite the Titanic being the most talked about, it's far from the most tragic shipwreck in history. Let's think together. Why is the Titanic so well remembered? Maybe it's because it was called unsinkable. Yet, ironically, it sank on its maiden voyage. Additionally, it carried some of the wealthiest and most famous people of the time, and the disaster was closely followed by newspapers, making it even more dramatic. But behind all this fame, there are stories of other shipwrecks you've probably never heard of, even though they claimed far more lives. Picture this: tragedies where thousands of people perished at once, yet these stories faded into obscurity, never receiving the same attention the Titanic did. Strange, right? What could have happened in these other cases? Were the ships as luxurious as the Titanic? Or maybe the passengers were less well known? Let me tell you, some of these shipwrecks are truly chilling, and the most shocking part is that many of them could have been prevented. It's sad to think that while the Titanic remains the subject of movies, books, and documentaries, these other massive tragedies barely make it into history books. So tell me, can you picture yourself on a ship that starts sinking in the middle of the ocean? Just the thought makes your heart race, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly the kind of terror thousands of people experienced in tragedies far greater than the Titanic. Another shipwreck occurred in 1865, at the end of the American Civil War. The SS Sultana, a steamship, was traveling along the Mississippi River, carrying Union soldiers who were finally on their way home. These men had survived brutal battlefields, starvation, and disease, and were so close to reuniting with their families. But the Sultana had a problem. The ship was designed to carry only 376 passengers. And guess how many people were on board that night? 2,130. That's right, triple its capacity. Soldiers were crammed in like sardines, with no space to sit or even breathe properly. And why? Greed. Each additional soldier meant more money for the people in charge of transportation. In the dead of night, while everyone slept or dreamed of freedom, something terrible happened. One of the Sultana's boilers, already overloaded, exploded with devastating force. The deafening noise was just the beginning. The ship split apart, and fire quickly spread, consuming everything in its path. Now, let me ask you something. Do you know how to swim? These people didn't have that chance. Many fell into the river, but the water was so icy and the current so strong that very few survived. About 1,800 people died that night. Soldiers who should have been celebrating life were brutally claimed by death. Did you think the story of the SS Sultana was terrifying? Wait until you hear what happened with the SS Sultana, one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history, and yet almost no one talks about it. The late 1940s. China was in the midst of a civil war, a time marked by chaos and the desperate flight of thousands. The SS Sultana, a passenger ship, departed from Shanghai packed with people. Officially, 2,150 passengers were registered, but unofficially, estimates suggest the total exceeded 4,000. It was so crowded that it seemed impossible to fit another soul aboard. And yet, the ship set sail, hurriedly navigating the Huangpu River. On board, every corner was occupied. Entire families, crying children, people carrying all their belongings in makeshift bags. Many were fleeing the horrors of war, seeking safety wherever they could call home. But what they found was unimaginable. As the Qianjia continued its journey, it entered an area where mines had been scattered during World War II. These deadly weapons floated silently, waiting for impact. And then it happened, a massive explosion. The ship, filled with people, was ripped apart. Many didn't even have time to comprehend what was happening. Some were thrown into the water by the force of the blast, while others were trapped inside the hull, with no chance of escape. It is estimated that between 2,750 and 3,920 people died that day. Can you imagine the horror? Thousands of lives lost in seconds. Families destroyed, dreams shattered. And the worst part? This disaster never received the recognition it deserved. Had you ever heard about this tragedy? It's infuriating to think about how history forgets so many lives. Leave a like and comment what you think about this story. If you think the fate of the SS Qianjia was tragic, wait until you hear about the SS Goya, a ship whose seems straight out of a nightmare. It was April 16, 1945. The world was in the final months of World War II, and Europe was in absolute chaos. The SS Goya, a German ship, was assigned to evacuate refugees and soldiers fleeing the advancing Soviet troops. It was supposed to be a symbol of hope, a chance for survival for thousands of people. On board, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew they were in danger, but there was no other choice. It was the Goya or face the war on land. During the night, as it sailed through the icy waters of the Baltic Sea, the silence was shattered by a terrifying sound. A Soviet submarine, L-3, had spotted the ship. Without hesitation, it launched 2 torpedoes. The impact was devastating. The explosion was so violent that the ship began to sink in less than 30 minutes. There was no time to organize an evacuation. Thousands of people threw themselves into the freezing sea in an attempt to survive, but the odds were slim. The icy water stole their breath in seconds. About 6,000 people lost their lives that night. The Goya, which was supposed to be a refuge, became a floating cemetery in the blink of an eye. Few survived to tell the tale, and the tragedy of the SS Goya became one of the worst maritime disasters in history. If you thought the tragedy of the SS Goya was heartbreaking, wait until you hear about the Wilhelm Gustloff, a story that holds the title of the deadliest shipwreck in history. In January 1945, Germany was plunged into the final desperation of World War II. The Wilhelm Gustloff, a German evacuation ship, was tasked with transporting refugees, wounded soldiers, and desperate civilians trying to escape the advancing Soviet forces. It was a ship designed to accommodate just over 1,800 people, but on this voyage, it carried more than 10,000 lives on board. The situation was unbearable. Women, children, the elderly, and soldiers were crammed into every corner of the ship. The biting cold of winter in the Baltic Sea made everything even harder. Many had already lost everything, except the hope of reaching safety. But that hope was shattered when a Soviet submarine, S-13, spotted the ship. Without mercy, the submarine fired 3 torpedoes. The impact was catastrophic. Within minutes, the Wilhelm Gustloff began to sink. Chaos erupted. Thousands of people tried to escape, but the freezing waters and the overcrowding left most with no chance. Many were trapped inside the ship. Others were swallowed by the icy waves. It is estimated that approximately 9,000 people perished that terrible night. Children, mothers, entire families were lost in one of the most devastating events ever recorded at sea. Only about 1,200 people managed to survive, leaving behind a story of terror and despair that echoes to this day. These tragedies must not be forgotten. Each one serves as a reminder of how fragile life can be and how history is full of painful lessons. If you felt the weight of these stories and want to keep uncovering remarkable facts like these, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's continue exploring the forgotten pages of history together. See you in the next video.